Hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Stephanie Nicholls. I am the Training Manager for Michigan Alliance for Families. I'm glad you found us. If you are just finding Michigan Alliance for Families, we are parent training and information all around the state of Michigan for families who have students that currently receive or might be eligible to receive special education supports and services. We support families with students from age birth to 26 and are here to answer all questions special education. So we're glad you found us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have specific questions. Today we're here to talk about positive behavioral interventions and supports. Specifically today we're going to look at behavior and problem behaviors, what causes them, how to get to the root of them, what they look like. Positive behavioral interventions and supports, what that is, what that looks like at school, what that can look like at home. The tool functional behavioral assessments, which is a positive behavioral intervention or support, and then how that tool of a functional behavioral assessment leads to a behavior intervention plan. So these may be some new words. You might not have heard these before. We're going to deep dive into these topics, but there is a lot of information today, so I just kind of want to give you an idea of what to expect. Before we get started, I want you to take a moment and kind of set aside some things that are already in your brain. We've all heard that children should be seen and not heard, that children are being defiant, that they're making trouble, that they're being a problem. I have absolutely had strangers give me unrequested parenting advice in the grocery store about how I should lay down the law for my child. I want us to set aside all of that history during our time together today. I want you to set aside how you may have viewed discipline in your house growing up or how you may have viewed discipline in your house up until today for behavior. I really want to kind of just pause on all of that in our brains and try and think of behavior a little bit differently today. Many of us have learned to deal with problem behavior by doing nothing until they happen, and then when the child has a behavior, a problem behavior, we punish that. That punishment does not teach new skills. The goal is to stop the behavior from continuing. If we don't teach the child what to do instead, the child will probably continue to misbehave, possibly in different ways. Anytime a child uses a behavior that is successful to meet a need, the behavior is likely to be repeated. Every behavior serves a function for the child. I think most people agree that we need to have consequences for problem behaviors. What I'm going to pose, what we're going to talk about, is that we have to focus our teaching on positive behavior skills, the skills we would like to see, and understanding the function of the problem behaviors so that we can teach the child a more appropriate behavior to serve the same function. Then the problem behavior is no longer needed. We really need to be teaching behavior instead of punishing behavior. That we're getting in front of the behaviors. We're teaching the behavior like we teach academics. We're providing the skills. We're giving the information for the student to learn appropriate behavior. When we think of the child as being a problem, we think of the child as mean or disrespectful. We feel angry or threatened, and we punish the child to make them think twice about being mean or disrespectful in the future. When we think of the child as having a problem, we think of the child as frustrated or discouraged, and we feel concerned and we want to help that child. We want to figure out ways to offer support and help and encouragement. When we're thinking of problem behaviors, I want to be thinking about that child having a problem, not being a problem. How do we help the child? How do we support? How do we provide encouragement? This is sort of the philosophy behind positive behavioral interventions and supports. We want to think about how to offer that support and encouragement and help in advance. Thinking about problem behaviors that we might see and things that might happen at school or at home, that these are problem behaviors we see across the board. We see biting, hitting, yelling, fighting, backtalk, screaming, lying, tears, hiding, spitting. These are all behaviors we do not want to see continue. But what we're seeing on the surface doesn't really reveal what's leading to the behavior or what might be underneath the behavior. What you see on your screen is called the behavior iceberg, and really is talking about how what's on the surface above the water, above the line, doesn't get to the root of the behavior or what's causing the behavior. There may be an unmet need that's leading to the behavior, a need for security or attention, a need for sensory input, a lack of social skills, a need for connection, a need for physical safety. Behaviors can be based in fear or shame or anxiety or hunger, worries, isolation, trauma. This is not a complete list. This is not everything that we might see as a problem behavior or everything that might be been laying underneath. This is just something for you to be thinking about how we get to the root of the behavior, how we address what's causing the behavior. And thinking about the behavior iceberg while we're talking today. So we're here to talk about positive behavioral interventions and supports. Let's start by kind of talking about what it is. It's a framework focused on improving behavior by integrating data, systems, and evidence-based practices within tiers of support. And those are kind of like layers, and we'll talk about that in just another minute, but those tiers are universal, targeted, and individual. So it's research-based on the science of behavior. It's intended to be proactive and team-based, where it's a framework for creating and sustaining safe and effective schools. The focus, the emphasis is on prevention of problem behaviors, development of pro-social skills, and the use of data-based problem solving for addressing existing behavior concerns. PBIS recognizes that students can only meet behavior expectations if they know what the expectations are, and that when everyone learns what's considered appropriate behavior, they have a common language they can use to talk about it. So throughout the school day, in class, at lunch, on the bus, students know what's expected from them. PBIS can be school-wide to promote a safe school setting by promoting social, learning, behavioral, and emotional needs for all their students. And PBIS supports all students. It's not special education specific. It doesn't matter if the student has an IEP, that schools can integrate positive behavioral interventions and supports throughout the whole system. It is not special education specific when we're talking about PBIS. Why are we talking about positive behavioral interventions and supports? Why are schools utilizing this? Why is this evidence-based practice important that we learn about it? PBIS results in improved outcomes. So some examples could be increased academic achievement, social emotional competence for children, reduced bullying behaviors, significant reductions in inappropriate behavior, and the reduced use of exclusionary discipline, restraint, and seclusion. Like data shows this. This is why PBIS is important. This is why we talk about it. PBIS, like I said, is not a special education specific evidence-based practice. There are layers of support here, and we'll talk more about those layers, like I said, in just a moment. When there are challenging behaviors at school and the student receives special education supports and services, it's important that the IEP team, the Individualized Education Program team, and the parents work together to create an effective plan for teaching socially appropriate behaviors. A lot of the IEPs across Michigan actually have a checkbox for considerations if the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports or other strategies are needed to address behavior because the student has behavior that impedes his or her learning or the learning of others. So PBIS is evidence-based. These results are what we're looking for. This is why we use it. And this is a strategy we would consider if a student has behavior that impedes his or her learning or the learning of others. The U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education released some guidance in July of 2022 that really talked about what proactive approaches are for supporting children with disabilities, what that should look like. And one of the things that it says is that every child should have access to a high-quality education provided in a safe, supportive, and predictable learning environment, free from discrimination, filled with healthy, trusting relationships, and one that ensures their social, emotional, and academic growth and development. This is the expectation, nationally from the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education for what it should look like for high quality education for students in a safe, supportive, and predictable learning environment. So when we're thinking about that social, emotional, and academic growth in a safe learning environment, we're thinking about behavior support in the IEP. That the IEP team must, in the case of a child whose behavior impedes the child's learning or that of others, consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address that behavior. That is in the federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. As part of the obligation of the school district, as stated in that federal law, IDEA, they are to provide free, appropriate public education to children with disabilities. So if a child with a disability has behavior that impedes their learning or the learning of others, the IEP team must consider and include in the Individualized Education Program, or IEP, the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports to address that behavior. The IEP team may elect to address the behavior through annual goals in the IEP, or modifications to the child's program, supports for the child's teacher or other school personnel, and any other special education related services and supplementary aids and services that are necessary to enable the child to advance appropriately towards attaining those behavioral goals. It does not matter what category your child is eligible. It does not matter what their medical diagnosis is. If your child is eligible for special education supports and services and their behavior is impeding their learning or the learning of others, the IEP should address the behavior. Students who receive special education supports and services are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. This is a foundational concept of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, our federal law for special education. What it really means is that special education supports and services are provided at no cost to the family, that those are free. That isn't that you will never pay the school $1. You're going to pay for art supplies, you're going to pay for field trips, you're going to pay for things that all kids are paying for, but special education supports and services are provided for free. That they are appropriate to the individual student and tailored to meet their unique needs. There is not a one-size-fits-all. There is not a one eligibility equals one program situation. They need to be appropriate for the individual child, provided by the public school system, and they are intended, the public school system is intended for all individuals, all students, to prepare them through education for their future after schooling. So post-secondary education, employment, and independent living is the education that should be provided to students that receive special education supports and services, just like that same education is preparing all of our students for their life after school. When we're talking about positive behavioral interventions and supports, that is one example of a multi-tiered system of support. And those are basically levels of support. I put this visual on the screen of this tiered wedding cake, and that's kind of what I want you to think of when we're thinking of these levels of support. That bottom layer is those universal supports. That's a huge cake. That's for everybody. Everybody gets a piece of cake. And then there's some kids that need additional targeted support. That's that medium layer. And then there's some kids that need intensive individualized support. That's the top layer. MTSS is something you may hear at school. It's that multi-tiered systems of support is something I want you to have heard and be familiar with. But really the important thing to know is that it is these layers and that it's a comprehensive framework that's designed to improve developmental, social, emotional, academic, and behavioral outcomes using a continuum, so a range of evidence-based strategies and supports. And those evidence-based strategies are proven to work in educational settings, and they've been studied by many researchers who support the practice as effective. So an evidence-based practice is helpful to the individual student and can be used by educators, parents, or other professionals. It can be used in different environments, but it has been studied by multiple researchers who support that the practice is effective. One example of an evidence-based practice that has been studied by many researchers and proven to be effective is positive behavioral interventions and supports. So I want to make sure the tiers make sense and you have a good idea of what PBIS looks like school-wide for a group that needs support and for individuals that require intensive support. So again, thinking of that cake, that tier 1, that big piece is the universal strategies that support all children. That middle layer, that tier 2, is targeted strategies and supports for children with additional needs. And then that small tip of the triangle or top layer of the cake is intensive strategies and supports that meet the specific needs of individual children. I want you to have a good understanding of what all three of these look like. So let's start with tier 1 and make sure that makes sense first. So what tier 1 is universal supports, and they establish a foundation for positive and proactive supports. Tier 1 support is robust, and it enables most of the students to experience success, typically like 80%. When we're thinking of what tier 1 practices could look like, it could include collaborating with students, families, and educators to define positive school-wide or program-wide expectations that prioritize social, emotional, and behavioral skills. So we're looking all across the building or all across the program, setting those clear expectations, and then aligning classroom expectations with those school and program-wide expectations. So no matter where you are, that same thing is expected of you for your social, emotional, and behavioral skills. When that is the case, we can explicitly teach expectations and skills to set all those students up for success and encourage and acknowledge expected behavior. So when we've set expectations throughout the whole building, whether I am the playground supervisor or the music teacher, I know what those expectations are, and I can encourage and acknowledge that expected behavior when I see it. It also is preventing and responding to unwanted behaviors in a respectful and instructional manner where we're teaching a replacement behavior, teaching that appropriate behavior, and fostering school or program family partnerships where the families are a part of that conversation and part of that expectations, that you're clear at home what those expectations are at school, that when you walk in the building, you see those around, you know what they are, you know how to reinforce those as well. Let's look at a couple of examples of what this could look like. If a school uses PBIS, they could develop 3 to 5 broad school-wide behavioral expectations that are positively stated and memorable. So school-wide expectations provide that common vision and language within the school. These are all over the school. When schools are utilizing this, you see it as a visitor walking in. And these expectations point to what to teach when it comes to social behavior. School-wide behavioral expectations are applied in all school settings, including the classroom. So let's look at a few examples. Here we have pause, which is positive attitude, act responsibly, work towards success, and show respect. So these supports are universal supports that apply to everyone and lay the groundwork for success. They're brief, they're easy to understand, they use positive language, and they state what the children or students should do rather than a negative statement which states what they should not do. And they focus on high standards for all students, and it makes it easier to remember if they're using a mnemonic or a school theme or mascot like this pause. And they're reflective and respectful of the cultural values of the surrounding community. So this is a shared expectation for the whole building that you would see everywhere. It might be on the folders, it might be on the windows, it would be in the classrooms, that everyone is going to have a positive attitude, act responsibly, work towards success, and show respect. Here's another example, which is bears. Again, we want it to be brief, use positive language, focus on high standards, and be memorable. So for bears, we're looking at be responsible, engage in learning, act safely, respect yourself and others, and show a positive attitude. All of these are setting those expectations where if someone is acting disrespectfully, we can circle back to respecting yourself and others. We can point to what the expectation is. If someone's not acting safely, we can ask them what the A is for. What does that look like? That feet are on the floor, not on the table. We can look at different ways to approach those behaviors, but this is setting the expectation that universal for everybody in the building. Tier 2 is targeted supports. And this is typically provided to a smaller group of students, and it allows for explicit instruction and additional opportunities to practice positive behaviors and receive constructive feedback. Consistent with IDEA, if the behavior of the child with a disability impedes their learning or the learning of others, the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies must be considered for that behavior. Some children, behavioral needs are not met through that school-wide or program-wide strategy. So the IEP team should determine what more targeted or individualized supports are necessary. When we're talking about targeted supports, they're typically those smaller groups. They could be social skills instructions, supporting, developing social relationships, self-management strategies, increasing access to academic supports, Check and Connect, which is a mentoring intervention designed to spot early signals of disengagement and improve school performance, reduce school dropout, restorative practices, or increasing prompts or reminders. Restorative practices focus on developing caring connections, listening to and valuing others' opinions, promoting accountability, repairing harm, and supporting reintegration back into the educational environment. Implementing restorative practices as a targeted support could include using a restorative group conferencing or restorative circles and conversations among students to facilitate healing. Research suggests that combining restorative practices with school-wide positive behavioral supports reduces disciplinary referrals and the disparities in the use of discipline. So when we're looking at targeted supports, we're looking at Tier 2. That's usually about 10 to 15% of the students in a building. And it provides that additional instruction and practice for behavioral, social, emotional, and academic skills. It increases adult support and supervision. It provides additional opportunities for positive reinforcement or that increase in prompts or reminders. It also may provide additional access to academic supports and an increase in the school-family communication so that we're making sure everything is the same, similar, aligned at home and at school, but increasing that back and forth has benefits to what this looks like for students. So let's look at an example of a Tier 2 targeted support, a check-in, check-out method system. It includes checking in and checking out daily with an adult at school, and it provides regular feedback and reinforcement from the teacher at school. Because there is a check-in and check-out at school that goes home, there's a family component that gets checked in, it's communicated, we're in the loop, and daily performance data is used to evaluate progress. So let's look at what this might look like. Here we have an example of what a check-in, check-out might look like. It is looking at those same building-wide expectations that are in the universal support, but this intervention increases the frequency of positive interactions between the student and adults in the building. So it's designed to address problem behaviors that are maintained by attention. It has that explicit instruction piece that we're reteaching those school-wide expectations over and over and over again. That it's structured so that it's broken down by time period, and the student's getting that feedback. There's that prompting for the student to remember what those expectations are throughout the day. So within a class period or throughout the day, the teacher provides additional prompts to the students using the expectations on the daily progress report or on the check-in, check-out card. It gives the student more opportunity to practice because it's broken down into subject areas or time periods, and they're getting that feedback. So they have opportunities across the whole school day in different environments, in the classroom, in the cafeteria, on the playground. They're getting that frequent feedback Um, and that reinforcement. So this feedback and reinforcement is deliberately linked to school-wide expectations so that at the end of each subject or time period, the teacher quickly provides feedback to each student on his or her behavior during that period or subject. And at the end of the day, the students check out with the designated adult. And then that's where that family component comes in, where they take this card home and get additional feedback from the family member. So the student brings home the daily progress report, and that's reviewed by the parent or guardian and signed and returned to school the next day. That's an example of a targeted Tier 2 support. When we're looking at Tier 3 supports, this is really where we're going to spend most of our time today, because this is the individualized intensive supports. Some children may benefit from intensive supports that are designed to meet the specific needs of an individual child. Supports may include conducting a functional behavior assessment, an FBA, and implementing a corresponding behavioral intervention plan, a BIP, or providing wraparound services or individual counseling. A school's Tier 3 team should include someone who has experience providing formal behavior support. They need to have behavior expertise and experience to develop appropriate supports. Tier 3 supports are the right supports to be individualized for the team that feels like they've tried everything and nothing works. I promise you they have not tried everything, and there are things that are going to work. We need to look more closely at the behavior. We need to look at what the function of the behavior is, why the behavior is occurring. A functional behavioral assessment is the process of finding out the reason behind or factors contributing to the child's behavior. So by investigating the conditions and other factors that contribute to the occurrence of the behavior, or the response that they get from the behavior, or the reason for the continuation of the behavior, the functional behavioral assessment provides useful information to inform the development of appropriate, effective interventions that address the root cause of the behavior rather than punishing or like a punitive approach as an attempt to stop or reduce the behavior. So the first step in an FBA is to clearly define the behavior of concern, what that interfering behavior is that's impeding the learning of your student or others, and then to ensure that it's measurable and observable, that we can collect data on that specific behavior. We do not want behaviors like disruptive or too active. I don't know what that looks like. That's not measurable and observable, where I'm going to count the same thing that you are. Data collection provides information on the frequency, the duration, the conditions that behavior occurs, where it happens, who is there when the interfering behavior does occur or does not occur. The events and conditions that typically occur before and after the behavior, and other relevant information that we're going to collect a lot of data to figure out the function of the behavior. Based on the analysis of that data, we develop a theory or a hypothesis. And that's looking at what happens before the behavior, what may trigger the occurrence of a behavior. That's called the antecedent. That specific description of the interfering behavior, and then the response to that behavior, what the consequence is, what happens after the behavior. And that all leads to the development or the revision of a behavior intervention plan, which is then monitored, evaluated, and adjusted as needed. So when should you request an FBA? You do not need to wait for the school to suggest an FBA. You can request this as a type of an evaluation. I would encourage you to request an FBA anytime your child has behavioral challenges impeding their learning or the learning of others. I would think about this when the team can't explain why problem behaviors are occurring, if there's a lot of disciplinary action, if they keep receiving behavioral referrals at school. Really, whenever your student is having recurring challenges in school related to social skills, impulse control, compliance, following instructions, or engagement, those are great times to look at what the function of that behavior is. What's going on there? Where is it breaking down? How do we get in front of it? Beyond those challenges, there are also times when an FBA is required by the law. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires an FBA whenever a child with a disability has his or her current placement changed for disciplinary reasons. The evaluation requirements of IDEA make it clear that children must be evaluated in all areas related to the suspected disability. This means that if your child has problem behaviors that are not improving, your child may need an evaluation to examine those behaviors more closely. When you are requesting a functional behavior assessment, it's a type of evaluation. That evaluation collects data to develop a plan to address the problem behavior. So requesting it is like requesting any other evaluation with your school team. Best practice is to request it in writing and let them know that you're concerned about a behavior and share your specific observations and concerns that are the behavior interfering with their learning. I mean, it can be a simple email to the team. Dear IEP team, I'm requesting my child receive an FBA. I believe he or she has behaviors that are interfering with his or her ability to access and benefit from their education. The behaviors I'm concerned about are blah, 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 bulleted list that summarizes your concerns. That's all it takes to get the ball rolling on requesting an evaluation to look at the function of the behavior. Then once we're thinking about an FBA, there's a lot of questions we want to consider, and there's a really specific skill set that's needed to conduct an FBA. That understanding the function or multiple functions is complicated, and there's not like a universal treatment. There's not a, oh, we found this, that means ABC. There's not a formula we can plug in, that it needs to be individualized to your one student. So it's a hard thing to look at and analyze and figure out. The first step, the first thing we need to think about is the operationally defined behavior. What are we really looking for? Disrespect looks different to me than it does to you. Upset looks different to me than it does to you. We really need to have a concrete definition of what that behavior is that we're looking for. We need to all be on the same page about how we're collecting that data around that specific operationally defined behavior. We need to look at if the behavior is happening during the same activity or with the same materials during the day. Are there specific things happening in the classroom environment with seating or noise level? Are there child-specific conditions with medication or anxiety or fatigue? Are they sick? Does it change with the setting? Is it specific people that the behavior occurs? Is it a peer issue or a teacher interaction or when new people are introduced? Are there certain events or conditions that lead up to the behavior, happen before the behavior? Are they triggers for the behavior? Is there a consistent consequence? What happens after the behavior? Does the behavior stop after some consequences or after a particular consequence? Are there personal factors that might be influencing the behavior? Is the instruction too hard or too easy? Is it a challenge with transitions? Are the directions unclear? Do they need to hear it and see it? Are there not choices? Are there not options? Is it an issue with how they're receiving the instructions and they're not able to follow those directions? Now, a lot of times we hear from schools that they told him twice and he still didn't do it. We hear from parents that I told him 100 times. And sometimes how the student processes the information, you can tell them 100 times and that's still not going to make a difference. That if that auditory processing doesn't retain the information to follow the directions, that can be a hurdle that creates problem behaviors. We cannot follow the instructions because we can't receive the instructions in that way. Do we need to look at another way to deliver that information? Do we need to have those directions in writing in addition to verbal? So these are all things to consider when we're thinking about an FBA. We also want to consider the members of the team. It takes a very specific skill set to conduct a meaningful FBA. Really understanding the function or multiple functions of the behavior. The person has to be trained on how to take data, because if we don't get good data, we can't form a good hypothesis. In Michigan, we don't have any requirements for who does an FBA, so talk with your team about who will be involved and what training they have. Is there a person with the knowledge, skills, and experience supporting behavior? Have they implemented evidence-based practices, conducted FBAs, designed and implemented and monitored individualized education programs and behavior intervention programs? Sometimes the district or ISD employs behavior consultants, often BCBAs, which are board certified behavior analysts that can be brought into the team for guidance and consultation when we're struggling with behavior. The team needs good data and experience to form a good theory and to develop a good plan. The other thing that's really great about data is that it can take some of the emotion out of the discussion. Behavior is really hard. It's really hard to look at objectively. It's very hard to figure out what the function is. It's hard to figure out how to have the conversation. And we need to be able to do that with our team to be able to get in front of that behavior that's impeding our child's learning or the learning of others. In order to do that, when we're collecting data, we want to make sure we have actual frequency to see patterns and develop a theory. We don't want vague time descriptions. We don't want to hear that the student usually does something or always does something, never does it. These vague time descriptors should not be anywhere in our FBA. That we want to have actual frequency and see what that behavior looks like and when it is occurring. There are no students that are always having problem behaviors. We need to look at when they occur, how long they last, what happens before them, what the consequence is, but it is not always. So we want to keep an eye out. We don't want to see any of these vague time descriptors. Let's talk a little bit about how we're operationally defining behaviors and what that looks like. We want that behavior of interest to be defined in a way that is observable, measurable, and repeatable. That it would be the same if it was identified by 2 or more observers and identified across time and in different settings. So if I want to look at what the behavior upset is, I want you to think about what upset is to you. Is it A, a child throwing a tantrum, B, a child who is crying, C, child is yelling, swipes arm across to clear table, or D, child stomps to their room and slams the door? Which one of these is what upset looks like to you? We need to operationally define the behavior, a behavior that is clearly defined so that it can be measured by more than one observer across different environments and settings. We need to know what we're looking for, and it needs to be an active behavior. The dead man's thumb, the dead man's test is a rule of thumb for deciding if something is a behavior. In order for it to be an operationally defined behavior, we want to stop and ask the question, can a dead man do it? If a dead man can do it, it's not a behavior. If a dead man cannot do it, then it could be a behavior. So let's think about that a little bit. For an example of a behavior, it could include sleeping, getting out of your seat, talking, looking away from the speaker. These are behaviors because these are things that a dead man cannot do. Non-behaviors would be being quiet, not responding. These examples are not behaviors because a dead man can do them. So not doing something doesn't pass the dead man's test for what we want to operationally define the behavior as. I was absolutely thrilled at a recent meeting for my child when the IEP coordinator explained to the team that the goal was not a lack of problem behaviors. The goal is for her to engage in learning with her peers. That is the point of all behavior support. It's not to get rid of the behavior. It's to ensure the student is engaging and learning in the classroom. Okay, so we've all agreed on an operationally defined behavior. We know what we're looking for. Now we want to look at the ABCs of behavior, which is looking at the antecedent, behavior, and consequence. The antecedent is what happens before the behavior. It's events that occur prior to that problem behavior. Um, we want to think about what the child was doing immediately before the behavior. Who else was there? Where were they? What time of day was it? What other context has occurred? Did we just arrive at art? Did we just have a snack? Did we just come in from recess? Was there a transition? Who is there? Um, did we have a change in support? Did we have a change in peers? Then we want to look at the behavior itself. Um, and that's that operationally defined behavior that we've all agreed on. What does it look like? What was that problem behavior? Is it tantrums or hitting? What specifically happened? And was anyone the target of the behavior? Is that different from time to time? Next, we want to look at the consequence, which is the results which follow the child's behavior. How did other people react? Did the child get what they wanted by doing the behavior? And that's looking at the function of the behavior. What is the child trying to get from the behavior? There are things that we know as parents that happen at home that might be good clues to what leads to behaviors. Do we know specific things that trigger behaviors with our kids? Do we know specific things that happen as frustration builds? That are things we can keep an eye out for to try and get in front of behavior. If you know as your child gets frustrated, they pull their hair a little bit or they tap the table a little bit, those are things you want to share with the school team that can help them while they're developing what they're looking for and looking at the ABCs and collecting data on your child's behavior. So we're going to build a data log. We're going to collect those ABCs, the antecedent, behavior, and consequence of the problem behavior over time. What happens before the behavior, what the behavior looks like, and what the consequences. From that log, that ABC information, we're going to be able to develop a theory on the function of the behavior. Because problem behaviors serve a function. That's why they're occurring. These are the 4 big categories when we're looking at the function that a problem behavior serves. The first is attention, that the student is getting attention from a parent, a peer, a teacher, someone in the room. And this is not necessarily that they're looking for positive attention. It could be positive or negative attention. It's just that seeking of attention. The function could be to get an item or an activity. That's a tangible function. And that could be a toy, a gadget, a video, food, an activity, or something else. The function could be to escape, to get away from something unpleasant that they won't do, or to do something to get away from something they don't know how to do because they don't have the current skills or knowledge to do it. Another function is automatic, and that's that they get a good feeling or it relieves a bad feeling from certain movements or actions. And that can also include a sensory function when that student needs additional sensory input, and that is seen as the problem behavior. When we are thinking about the function of behavior, it's important that we're still thinking about how to meet that function when we're looking at replacement behaviors. So the goal is not to get rid of the function, that we're looking at the data and developing a theory on what the function is, because we want to teach a replacement behavior that meets the same function but doesn't get in the way of learning. So it's not to eliminate the function. We want to meet the function of the behavior with an appropriate replacement behavior that we can teach. As I said before, a lot of times behaviors serve more than one function, and it's important that the team consider multiple functions. Not thinking about one function can result in an ineffective intervention. And again, that's where that relevant knowledge, experience of your team members is going to come in, that we want to be able to think about this complex behavior situation and be considering all those different pieces and how they work together. So we've operationally agreed on defining what the problem behavior is, and we've collected data around that behavior. where it happens, who is there, what happens before the behavior, what the behavior looks like, and what the consequence of the behavior is. From that behavior log, we've looked at what is our theory on the function of the behavior. Why is the behavior occurring? With that theory on the function, we're able to start to talk about a behavior intervention plan. And the behavior intervention plan teaches the adults how to get in front of the behavior that triggers or teach a replacement behavior. So it includes specific strategies for modifying the curriculum, environment, activities, or interactions to address the problem behavior or to prevent occurrences of the problem behavior. The FBA is used to develop that informed guess or theory, and then the theory is used to develop an effective behavior intervention plan and identify additional supports and services to be included in the IEP. Are there changes needed to the classroom, like to the seating or instruction or curriculum? How are the replacement behaviors going to be taught and reinforced? Do the replacement behaviors serve the same function as the problem behaviors? Is the child able to do the replacement behavior? Do we need to teach those skills? And then are we going to be able to reinforce the new behavior across all environments? Will teachers and parents and the people in the cafeteria all be using a similar reinforcement system? What is that going to look like? So there need to be that meaningful incentives or consequences built in. The BIP is really the guide for how to get in front of the behavior triggers or define how new skills and replacement behaviors will be taught and reinforced. It needs to be a living document because we're working from a theory and we're going to see if it works or not, and we're going to make adjustments. That this is not something that once we've developed it, it's set in stone and it's done. It's going to change over time. Our theory may be off, or our children may change because they're going to continue to change. For behavior intervention plans to have good outcomes, it's important to have an accurate FBA and understand what is maintaining the behavior of concern, what the function of the behavior is. Interventions and supports are based on what is maintaining the behavior. So if the intervention is based on accurate data, it's more likely the intervention will work. If it's based on inaccurate data, it's less likely to work. So we want to have measurements in place to make sure the child is making progress with the behavior intervention plan. We want to see if it's working or not. We want to review it on a regular basis and make sure if they're not working, we're going to make adjustments or make changes. When developing a behavior intervention plan, we need good data from an FBA, and then we need to develop that theory on the function, and then with the function, we're going to talk about possible interventions that can still meet that same function and meet the needs of the student. So these are some types of possible interventions. There are skills-based interventions when the student cannot do the task because they don't have the necessary skills. And then the teacher can implement a skills-based intervention which teaches the student the missing skills. When I'm saying skills, I don't just mean academic skills. They could be social skills. They could be organizational skills. We're looking at what that missing skill is and then breaking that down to teach the skill for it to be able to be implemented. In some cases, the teacher may implement an antecedent-based intervention that involves making changes to the setting or situation to get in front of the problem behavior. There could be a change or an adjustment to the classroom routine or the procedure to eliminate triggers for the problem behavior or to provide more opportunities for the student to display the replacement behavior. In some cases, the teacher may implement a consequence-based intervention, and this is adjusting the consequence that affect the problem behavior. So consequence interventions are used to minimize reinforcement for problem behaviors and increase reinforcement for desirable behaviors. So withholding the consequence that previously reinforced the problem behavior is one example of a consequence-based intervention. So if we look at the behavior and the theory is that the behavior is for attention, withholding attention may be what the consequence-based intervention looks like. Again, very rarely that simple, just an easy example to make it make sense what that consequence-based intervention looks like. Let's run through a couple of simplified examples to see the concept in action. This is James, and this is James's ABC chart. We're going to look at the antecedent, what happens before the behavior itself, and the consequence of the behavior. On Monday, James came home from school, had a snack, and played video games for 30 minutes. When Dad said it was time to turn off the game, James yelled, refused to turn off the game, and begged for more time. And as a result, James got 5 more minutes of his games, but then had to do his chores with no objections. That it was not worth the fight to Dad at that moment. He had other things he needed to do. That was not the time that was best spent. You can have 5 more minutes and then I don't want to hear about it. I think we've all had that moment for sure. Tuesday night at 10:15, James had been playing video games online since 9:30. Mom said it was lights out in 10 minutes and time to turn off the game. James again yelled and said it wasn't fair. All his friends don't have lights out time. He's too old for this. He should decide when he's done playing. Mom said, you can have 15 more minutes of game and then that's it. It's time to get ready for bed. So this is our very oversimplified data collection for James and what that antecedent, behavior, and consequence look like. Again, we want a bigger time frame than this. We want more data than this. This is just for us to understand our concepts a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about what James is learning happens if he objects to turning off the game. What do you think is the function of James's behavior? I think it's to get something. I think it's to get more time playing video games. Do you have any ideas of a plan to teach a replacement behavior or to get in front of the behavior? What possible replacement behaviors or interventions we might want to consider? Do we want to think about a skills-based intervention, an antecedent-based intervention, or a consequence-based intervention? I think we could think about an antecedent-based intervention. We could get in front of the problem behavior. We could set a timer. We could change the routine to earn video game time. We could work on clearly defining setting expectations. We could look at a consequence-based intervention where we don't get more video game time from objecting and yelling. These are some theories that may work, and we may test them, and we may find that didn't meet the function. Maybe he wasn't trying to get something. We may find that we are wrong. We may be looking at the wrong thing. But this is our first theory on James's behavior. Let's look at another example. Let's look at Emma's ABC chart. Emma started a new semester and class schedule a week ago. Emma's third hour class is math with Miss J downstairs. Emma seems upset for no reason, screams, and throws her backpack in the stairwell on her way to fourth hour. An adult instructs Emma to pick up her backpack and go upstairs. Emma complies, but cries the entire time in the stairway. Emma sits quietly in the first 30 minutes of fourth hour science, not engaged with the class or the content. What do we think about this data? What do we think the function is of that behavior? Do you think we have an operationally defined behavior? I might argue that not engaging with the class and the content is also behavior disrupting her learning. And when I look at this chart, a big red flag for me is that she's upset for no reason. That we know behavior is communication and that Emma is not upset for no reason. So how do we dig into the root of the issue here? Do we have enough information? Do we have enough data? Was there an incident in the stairway in the past? Is there a sensory issue in the stairway? Do the sounds echo? Is it loud during passing time? Is it an open grate stair? Is she scared? I think we need a lot more information than what we have here to be able to develop a great theory for Emma, that we need to have more data, even in our simplified example. But I think if we were going to try and take a stab at what the function is of Emma's behavior, I think we want to get away from the stairwell, and then there may be some sort of sensory need. There may be some sort of automatic response there. So if we're looking at the function as getting away from something or automatic, what are possible interventions that make sense? Is it a change to the setting? Is it an antecedent-based intervention? Are we going to look at a different stairwell? Are we going to look at who is there? Are we going to look at the possibility of using the elevator? Is it something about the stairs? Is it dark? Is it cold? What is the function is going to define what the intervention is. So we need to have more information to build a good theory. Let's look at another example. Again, a simplified example. This is Levi. And Levi on Tuesday at 10:30 during class reading was asked to read a paragraph out loud. He swore at the teacher and flipped his books off of his desk and was sent to the principal's office. On Thursday, later in the week at 1:05, students were taking turns reading the science chapter out loud. Nothing was specifically requested of Levi. He got up and started wandering the room. He was tapping other students' desks and again was sent to the principal's office for being disruptive. Any ideas on what's leading to this behavior with Levi? What do you think the function of the behavior is? Do you think Levi wants to read in front of the class? I think Levi's trying to get away from something. Does he possibly need a skills-based intervention? Is he struggling to read on grade level, or is he behind? Is he trying to avoid embarrassment? Do you think Levi would rather get in trouble than take a risk of not having that skill to read in front of his peers? Could the teacher front load when Levi will be reading in class? Can they practice in advance so that he knows what paragraph he would be reading? Is that a possible strategy for intervention? Is that something we could test? There's not a one right answer. It's one of the complicated things with figuring out behavior is we want to see what might work and then test the theory and see if it is working. Children's behavior can change if we set really clear expectations and then we teach the behaviors that we want to see. We teach what we want and we teach the replacement behavior that's appropriate to replace the problem behavior. We also need to model those behaviors and then consistently recognize and reward the behaviors when they occur. We want to have lots of praise and reinforcement. These little smileys that you see on the face here show that magic ratio, which is 5:1. We want at least 5 positive praise reinforcements to every 1 correction when we're thinking about addressing behavior with any child. You can try an ABC behavior record at home. You can practice collecting data and developing theories. Look for what leads to behaviors, look for what triggers might be, and then formulate a plan to get in front of the behavior. You can also formulate a plan to teach replacement behaviors, and then look at the impact of the plan on the behavior. We collected data, we have a theory, we're going to test it. Is the behavior going up or down? What does it look like? A worksheet to collect data does not need to be overly complex. We can look at what the date or time is, what the activity is that is happening beforehand, what the behavior looks like, what happened to trigger it, what the consequence is, and if the behavior is increasing or decreasing. This is the information that you want to have for a log to develop your theory. On your screen, you see a graph, and on this graph, the red line represents the number of people who drown by falling in a pool in the years from 1999 to 2009. You see a black line on the graph as well, which represents the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in those same years. And when you look at this graph, it looks like these lines are related to each other. They seem to be following a similar pattern. They look like one is leading to the other. And I can tell you with confidence that the number of people who drown by falling in a pool is not related to the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in. That this graph is a fantastic, accurate data representation of how correlation does not equal causation. That we can have really good data and develop a really good theory based on the data that we have. And when we test the theory, we can still find out that we're wrong. And that's part of why a behavior intervention plan is a living document, is that we need to see if it's working, if our theory is holding true, and if we're being effective. And if it's not, we need to make adjustments. Because even with good data and good theories, we're not always right the first time. We're not always right the second time. That's why we need this to be a living document that's making adjustments as needed. We covered a lot of information today, and I just want to walk through a little bit of this Tier 3 individualized positive behavioral intervention support that we spent a lot of time on. So I want to make sure the steps make sense and we know how we would take action. We start by operationally specifically defining the behavior, the who, what, where, when, so that we all can be looking at the same thing and collecting data in a measurable way where we are all looking at the same behavior. When we're looking at that, then we're able to observe and collect our ABC data, which looks at our antecedent, behavior, and consequence. We're looking at what happens before the behavior, what the behavior looks like, and what the consequence of the behavior is. This allows us to develop a theory on the possible function or purpose of the behavior. Once we have a theory of the purpose of the behavior, we can create a behavior intervention plan to teach an appropriate replacement behavior that meets the same function, or to get in front of the problem behavior and reduce the problem behavior. When the plan is developed, we want to continually evaluate that intervention and make changes as needed. This is the process to get from we have a behavior interfering with our learning to we have a plan in place that's starting to decrease the behavior. There were a lot of funny acronyms in the things that we talked about today, so I did just want you to have this quick reference, this quick glossary of some of those acronyms if you wanted to refer back or wanted to find this information. Michigan Alliance for Families provides free parent and training information for all things special education all across the state of Michigan. We have 22 regional parent mentors who live where they serve and know about local resources, are able to connect you with information. Please do not hesitate to reach out to your regional parent mentor as you have questions. You can reach them at 800-552-4821, and there is always lots of information available on our website, michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm glad that you were able to join us. I hope it was able to clarify some of this process, and if you do have additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your regional parent mentor. We are active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you are watching this video on our YouTube channel. Please feel free to check out our other content on the channel or to go over to our website for more information. Don't hesitate to call your regional parent mentor or email us for more information. Our job is to support families, and we love our jobs, so please do not hesitate to reach out. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. I hope this information was helpful. Have a good one. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs.